So before we get started into some of the content today, I want to take a few minutes to ground us in some of the terms that we'll be using. So often in these conversations, the words like grief and hospice and palliative care are thrown around without having a real understanding of what these mean. So we want to start with shared understanding. Some of these may seem very straightforward, some may carry personal weight, and we want to understand that words matter in this space, especially when we're talking about illness, grief, and family history. So we'll start with acute illness. When we say acute illness, we're talking about something, an illness or disease that comes on suddenly and maybe short term. Chronic illness, it refers to something ongoing. So a condition that someone may be managing for months or years or the entirety of their life. Terminal illness means an illness that is expected to shorten someone's life. Even saying that out loud can feel very heavy, so I caution us about when we do and do not use terminal illness. Please only refer to an illness as terminal if it is about yourself or a loved one. Don't assume someone's diagnosis is terminal. A caregiver is anyone providing care emotionally, physically, or practically. Often that can be a family member or a partner. Sometimes it's a role that people didn't step into voluntarily and were actually compelled to by lack of structural support from hospitals or different institutions. Palliative care focuses on comfort and quality of life at any stage of serious illness. It can exist alongside curative treatment. It does not indicate hospice or end of life necessarily. Hospice, which is distinct from palliative care, is focused on comfort, typically when someone is nearing the end of their life and no longer pursuing curative treatment. Anticipatory grief, the grief that can begin before a loss actually happens, while someone is still alive but declining. Disenfranchised grief, a grief that's not always recognized or validated by others. Intergenerational trauma, the way that the impact of trauma moves through families or generations, shaping coping patterns, silence, anxiety, or relationships across generation. We'll talk a little bit about that today. And you may relate to some of these terms. You may have your own definitions for them. You have a right to have various interpretations shaped by your own experience. This isn't about trying to be rigid. It's about giving us shared language so we can better understand one another. And I'm happy at any point when we open up the dialogue to go back and help you relate to some of these specific terms to give language to your experiences. So we can move on to slide 9. So now that we've named some of the key terms we'll be using today, I'm really eager to get us into dialogue. I want to outline the structure for our time. So let me start with some personal disclosures. I do this because I want us to be operating on a peer-to-peer basis. Neither Paul or I are here to lecture you. We're here to be in community with you as queer people. So I myself identify as a lesbian. I live with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and mast cell activation syndrome. These are rare inherited conditions that affect my connective tissue and immune system. They are multi-system conditions that impact many parts of the body. They're very difficult to diagnose and disproportionately affect women. Because of that, many people experience long diagnostic journeys, medical gaslighting, and the need for chronic illness management because there is no cure for these conditions. When we talk about illness in the context of young adulthood, we're talking about a stage of life that is full of transitions. Finishing school, starting work, moving forward towards independence, forming adult friendships, exploring intimate or romantic relationships, perhaps thinking about having a child, and illness can complicate all of these. For many young adults, identity development and self-expression are ongoing processes, and managing a serious or chronic condition during this time can influence how you see yourself, your independence, the body you live in, and what is possible for you. There's also a real tension between wanting to participate fully in life, to travel, to work, socialize, explore relationships, and the practical realities of managing your health. Fatigue, appointment, treatment side effects, physical limitations can make that balance very, very challenging and make folks feel isolated or different from their peers in the same age group.
Mhm.
For queer and LGBTQ young adults, these challenges are often compounded by systemic barriers, stigma, discrimination, difficulty in finding providers who are affirming and knowledgeable both about your health and your identity. Accessing care that respects your body and experience is not always straightforward. And for many of us, myself included, the compounded emotional effects of medical gaslighting as a queer person and as a young person with an illness, which is, of course, when a healthcare provider dismisses or minimizes your symptoms, can create tremendous rippling effects and self-doubt. It can delay our care. It can erode trust in ourselves and in others. And recognizing this is a first step in advocating for yourself and navigating your healthcare more confidently. We can move to the next slide. So this is the last slide where I'm going to be talking at you, and then we'll hear a little from Paul, and then we'll just open up for some what I hope is a robust discussion. Um, I want to share from the young adult perspective, and again, Paul will share a little bit from his perspective, but chronic illnesses and serious health conditions are really on the rise among all adults, but LGBTQ young people are facing a disproportionate burden. I'm going to give some statistics here, and this is not to scare folks or kind of have a doom and gloom mentality, but really just to show the importance and scope of coming at these conversations with data. So, here in the United States, we have a significant increase in chronic conditions among young people. And when I talk about young people, it's sort of a nebulous term, but here I'm talking about folks. I'll give a few different statistics, but folks under 40. So in 2023, nearly 60% of individuals aged 18 to 34, so a little bit of a different threshold, reported living with one chronic condition. 27% reported having multiple conditions. And what's important here is that's a 25% increase since 2013. Research consistently shows that LGBTQ young people experience higher rates of serious illness. These include heart disease, stroke, hypertension, diabetes, lung and kidney disease compared to their cisgender heterosexual peer. One important contributing factor to that disparity is what we call minority stress, so the chronic stress that comes from stigma, discrimination, and prejudice. This ongoing stress can actually increase inflammation markers and weaken the immune system. On top of that, it can also lead to higher rates of coping behaviors such as smoking, alcohol use, and obesity. And of course, LGBTQ people are also they're less likely to get timely cancer screenings and are more likely to delay care because of past discrimination or lack affirming healthcare providers. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point. I do, if folks are interested, I'm happy to share more examples that are disease area specific, because when we look at testicular cancer or gynecologic cancer, or we look at multiple sclerosis, all of these disease profiles carry different statistics around why LGBTQ people may be more vulnerable to them. I want to focus, though, less on the details of each illness and more on opening a space for dialogue and understanding so that we can hear from you. Um, let's move on to the next slide and hear a little bit from Paul, and then we will stop our recording and I'll welcome everyone to participate together.
Hey everyone. As you can see, I am a person who survived full-blown AIDS and PCP pneumonia in 1995. Uh, I lost almost all of my friends in the those 10 years around that year, and got a real dose of what it's like to have the government not care about what's happening to you. Um, And what's strange about the AIDS diagnosis is it has morphed. It was a terminal illness, and then it was a chronic illness, um, and now it's sort of in this weird region where I can't even get doctors to do blood tests on how many T cells I have because they don't think it matters anymore. And even though I'm 67 and going where no one's gone before because there aren't all that many survivors as old as we are. Um, and I have always felt like the system should be watching me to gain insight about what happens to older folks, but none of that is happening. So there is quite a bit of gaslighting for people with AIDS now within the system. Basically, they're saying as long as you have 200 T cells or more, you don't have to worry, and if you're undetectable. And I just don't think that we have enough information to be able to make that call. Um, there was also a strange phenomenon of why did I not die when all of my friends did? And the answer to that is that the reason I didn't die was because I joined an illegal buyers club and I broke the law and I ordered illegal antiretrovirals from France. It was kind of like Dallas Buyers Club, although the participants weren't as helpless as they were in that movie. And it was all of us getting together, learning about how this virus was functioning at a sort of cellular, molecular biology level, and then researching different drugs that were available around the world, but not in the United States. They were illegal here because there was only one patent for AZT, and they weren't going to let anything else help people until Americans owned it. So we would, research and then decide together what we were going to buy and literally, bet our lives on it because all of it was experimental at that point. So happily, I bet my life on a really good one. And I never took AZT all by itself, which was what the medical establishment was saying to do. So I learned really early on not to rely on the medical establishment for even for diagnoses and prognoses. I was also one of the first people, PCP pneumonia was the fungal pneumonia that was like the main killer of folks. And nobody had survived PCP pneumonia until about 2 weeks before I came down with it. They just hit on a formulation that seemed to work. And so part of it was very lucky timing, part of it was very self-determined not to be a sheep and allow the medical establishment to do to me what I saw doing to people around me. Um, so now at 67, I work with LGBTQ seniors and around housing and home care. And then I also am personally caregiving for an elderly couple who are having, one has horrible problems with Alzheimer's, and the other one has, in response to her Alzheimer's journey, has had two strokes and is in a wheelchair. And so I think part of the deal is you just never know what's coming. But I think when you have a chronic illness, you are able to accept stuff as it comes along. Because nothing's coming out of the blue. And I have just gotten used to being in diagnostics all the time. And part of that is, normal growing older, but part of that is my immune system really is not the same as it would have been if I hadn't had full-blown AIDS. So whenever I get a cold, I have to be really careful not to get pneumonia. And it's caretaking like that. And I go to the gym 4 days a week and I'm really conscious of what I eat. So I'm in good health, but with the knowledge that this sort of Damocles sword is hanging over my head that nobody really understands. Um, and I oh, I see Hannah coming back on. No, no. Um, so I guess in terms of this conversation, I I don't think the younger generation understands what AIDS really is about because it's been managed since they grew into adulthood. There's a lot of, denial as well. I know a lot of people who are on PrEP who don't think about how that's exposing them to sexually transmitted diseases. And there are some, like there's a gonorrhea that's been in the works for a while that's drug resistant. So people like they hear what they want to hear. They will deal with something as much as they have to deal with it, but it really is up to you to be your own um, soldier. And when you've got a chronic disease, that kind of never lets up. Um, so I think that is enough of my background and how I want to sort of position myself in this discussion. Um, we do work with a lot of younger folks, and there was one point where um, I really didn't feel like they understood what their elders went through during the AIDS crisis. So I was showing them different archival material, and there's one really startling video. It's a minute and 38. It's called the Act Up Ashes demonstration. And that was where people took their friends' ashes and dumped them on the White House lawn. But the video of it, it's a very gray, rainy day. And the film itself is very grainy. Everybody's really silent as they're walking towards the Capitol. Everybody's obviously really tense and doesn't know what's going to happen, and also grieving because they're holding their friends in urns and plastic bags. And when they get to the gate of the White House or the front lawn, the police come charging the crowd on horseback. And the crowd like links arms, the people in the front link arms and protect the rest of the crowd. And other people are frantically pouring their friends' ashes onto the lawn. And it's just like, oh my God. And the kids were just watching. They were like, what? And I don't, I think it's really important for intergenerational conversation around AIDS so that people don't get complacent, and that they also don't minimize the experiences that their elders went through, not only in surviving the disease, but in also losing an entire generation of friends around them all at once.